Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our very special guest here this morning. As is the usual procedure, he will, at the conclusion of his remarks, go directly into question and answers. I would encourage you to ask him. This is a very rare opportunity that we have to ask questions of a commissioner whose department is one of the fastest growing areas in state government because of our conviction that we ought to put the bad elements of society behind bars. Alan Ault received his Bachelor of Arts degree here in Atlanta from Oglethorpe University. He went on to the University of Georgia in Athens and received both his master's and doctorate in education. He was appointed by Governor Miller to his current post as Commissioner of the Department of Corrections in 1993. Prior to that time, he served as Commissioner of the Department of Corrections here in Georgia, as well as in the states of Mississippi and Colorado. He started as a warden, so he's come up through the ranks. And during times in which he was not a department head of a corrections department in one of the three states, he had his own consulting firm, and he was the preeminent expert witness in many, many conditions of confinement cases. Without further ado, I would like you to join me in welcoming a very special guest, Dr. Alan Ault.
Good morning. I know it's early, Linda, but everything will be all right. It's my pleasure to be here. I have read some of your publications, not all of them. I have talked to many of the individuals who belong to this foundation. I have several old friends here. Tom Perdue, who I haven't seen in quite some time. We worked together when I was working for a guy named George Busby. Linda Coker is here, who started some false rumors recently that she's not going to run again. And Sheriff Bill Hudson, good to see you, Bill. And many others, but I just wanted to mention some old friends. Corrections is an entity that, unlike neurosurgery, very few of you give advice to your neurosurgeon on how to perform a right lower frontal lobotomy. But everybody, and I mean everybody, gives me advice on how to run corrections. Even my mother tells me. And probably that's as it should be. This agency is here for only one purpose, and that's its only mission, and that's to protect the public. The question is, and the advice I get, is how do you do that? Do you put them in chains and go to a new old Alabama program? Do you put them in stocks? Do you cane them? What do you do so that they do not create additional victims? And I'd be the first to tell you that we do not have all the answers. I do not have all the answers. But I do know some things that we can do, and I know a lot of things that we can't do. I'd probably like to start with that point. Since I was a warden, somebody figured it up recently, I've been sued for somewhere around $14 billion. I mean, they never sue you for less than $1 million. I had one inmate that sued me for $10,000. I was really worried. I thought maybe they might have had something. But we've been in court, myself, dozens and dozens of times, and the whole entity of corrections have been litigated to death, beginning in the late 60s, and there is not many things about prison life that is not litigated, including how many times the air must turn over in each housing unit, the calories and nutritional value of every meal that you serve, how often and what kind of recreation you provide, the square footage that you should provide each inmate. And of course, the Eighth Amendment right against cruel and unusual punishment is the amendment that they use most often in all the condition cases. So we know what we can't do. The challenge is to find things that we can do to turn behavior around. Now, we have a system in Georgia that just a little over 2 years ago, when I became commissioner again, we were about 4.5% of the state revenue. We're now a little over 6% of the state revenue going to corrections. Last calendar year, the prison population was growing at a clip of a little over 100 new inmates per week. We grew 5,300 inmates last calendar year. That slowed down a little bit. We're now at about 55 per week rate, but that's still a rapid expansion. Let me put it in another perspective. 5,300, our largest facility and our average facility that we're constructing now is 1,000 beds, so that's 5 new prisons worth in 1 year. The cost of those facilities, minimum or medium security, we don't build any minimum because the minimums go elsewhere. They go to the county camps. And our population is getting more violent and the security level is skewing up to the right. And but each of those 1,000-bed facilities are constructed at a cost of about $28 million. So that's 5 a year at the rate we were growing. The legislature in this last session provided funding for 4,600 new beds and planning monies for additional 4 new prisons, 1,000-bed prisons, plus they'd already provided planning money for a chronic care facility. So in the pipeline, there's about 4,600 beds that we should have up in a year that we attach to existing newer facilities. And then the new facilities, the other 5,000 beds will come along in about 2 years, but we will still be behind the curve. Our projection now is that by the end of '98, we would have 45,000 inmates. We're right at 34,000 now with 2,400 backed up in the jails. That's one aspect of it. This department also administers a state probation program. We now have 132,000 probationers. Our average caseloads are at 207, with the national standards being 100, so we're more than double the standards. That's not a good sign. That does not give judges a lot of faith to probate somebody when they know they're going to get limited supervision when caseloads are that large. And of course, in the metropolitan area, I say that's an average. In the metropolitan area, they're much larger. It's out in the rural areas, some of their caseloads are at 80 and 90, and we're constantly trying to equalize those caseloads across the state. Georgia has more and better alternatives to incarceration than any other state in the union, but we're still falling behind the curve. We have more boot camps than any state in the union. We have transition centers, diversion centers, a lot of different types of alternatives, including intensive probation supervision, and where we put 2 individuals on a caseload to supervise people day and night. They're subject to being, and I've gone with them at 2 o'clock in the morning, and we go in and check, give them an instant drug test, etc. And we keep close tabs on those individuals. Inside the prison system, the total staffing for the Department of Corrections right now is 15,000 individuals, both in probation and in the prison system. Right now, we're in a real bind because although we've opened up all 9 new prisons in the last 2 years, We're in a state of low unemployment, 4% statewide, quote, 2.5% in the metro area. To give you, and therefore I'm down about 1,000 correctional officers statewide. I have some prisons it's very difficult to recruit staff. Dooley, Wilcox, in the South Georgia area has been very difficult since we opened them up. Phillips up here at Buford, I'll give you an example. The county camp in Gwinnett County had 4 openings. They advertised. They start at $23,000 a year. They had 400 applicants. 10 miles away at Phillips Correctional Institute, state salary begins at $17,000. We advertised and got 6 applicants. And that's difficult, and it makes the prisons dangerous. And when people tell me to put them to work, I need supervision to put them to work. Let's talk about work. I've seen the political ads. I heard it all through the last gubernatorial race. You know, if I'm elected governor, I'm going to put inmates to work. And I thought, darn, I wish I'd have thought of that. And I want to tell you that we work the inmates as much as we can find supervisors to work them. On any given day, about 75% of our inmate population works. Those who do not work are either in the diagnostic process or are too emotionally disturbed, and that's becoming a real problem, or they're too physically ill, or they're too damn mean to work. That's also a problem. We work in a lot of different areas. We have 3,000 working on our farms. We have the largest farm operation probably in the Southeast. We produce food so that it only costs $1.89 a day, meeting all those nutritional and calorie values dictated by the federal courts for 3 meals a day, $1.89. We produce, as an example, right at 2 million dozen eggs a year. We grow our own pork, our own beef. I just got was down at Reedsville last week, and the Vidalia onions are coming in good at the prison. We have an industry, correctional industries, and we can only sell to other political entities that will gross $30 million this year. And that includes, keep buying those Olympic license plates. It's good for business. But it's more than license plates. We make chemicals. We do sewing. A lot of the road signs you see all over the state are produced in prisons. But there isn't much that I can create in correctional industries that I usually don't wind up into the governor's office about, wondering why I am competing with some private industrialist. It's a very difficult thing. You get 2 messages. 1, put them to work, and 2, don't compete. And that's a difficult situation to be in. But we do an awful lot of road work. We have inmate construction crews all over the state. Last year, we've done everything but from building college dorms in Middle Georgia College for the Board of Regents to refitting and renovating a $500,000 renovation job of the Bacon Theater in Alma, Georgia, to doing a helicopter hangar over here at a facility in Marietta where the state patrol helicopters will be stationed. We have saved the taxpayers through inmate construction alone somewhere close to $16 million a year. So we work them. I don't need to put them in chains to work them. In fact, that would be a real deterrent to an effective workforce. We've done that. We've been there. I've been there. For some reason, all the advice I get is from the Old Testament, very little from the New. Most of you would know that if you beat a dog with a stick, that you probably won't socialize that dog. That dog is probably going to bite you. Now, when I talk about treating human beings, we have some tenets in corrections. We believe in discipline. I believe in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I believe you have to provide food, water, shelter as basics, and then you have to have safety. And I'm talking about safety both for the staff and the inmates before you can do anything about truth and beauty and self-actualization. And what the left-wingers do not understand is that if you do not have discipline, what you have is anarchy. The perfect example is when I went to Colorado as director, and they had some character from California that had been there before me. He had telephones in the cell blocks, and if the inmates didn't like the warden's orders, they could call him and he'd overturn them. You talk about, he'd let the haircut code go, the dress code go, all discipline go, and when I got there, the average yearly killings in one prison was 19. In the prison system in Georgia, you'll hear a lot of sir, yes sir, ma'am, yes ma'am. You'll hear the sound of marching. When I walk into a prison, any of you can go to any of our prisons unannounced, and you'll be able to see yourself in the floor. We believe in sanitation. That's a lot to do with discipline also. You won't see any long hair. You won't see any earrings. You won't see any beards. You'll see neat uniforms. We have the lowest inmate-on-inmate assault rate in the country. We have the lowest inmate-on-officer assault rate in the country. And what I even like better, we have the zero inmate-on-commissioner assault rate. Now, television. Favorite topic of Matt Tower. Is Matt here today? We do have television. We've had television ever since I was a warden. We live in a television generation. We do work inmates 8 hours a day. I would work them longer, possibly if I had the supervisors to work them longer. But there is an 8-hour period that I would rather they be recreating and watching television than planning on a riot or escape. And we try to fill their day. We have a new computerized offender management system now. Every offender has a card in his pocket where his day is totally scheduled. It tells him when he gets up, when he goes to breakfast. At every moment, an officer can come and ask for that card, and he'll know exactly where that inmate should be. It's amazing how that system that we've implemented in the last year has increased the productivity of our inmates and the productivity of our staff. Do we educate them? I certainly hope so. The average reading grade level in the Georgia prison system is 6th grade. That's highly unemployable. You can't even read the Atlanta Journal-Constitution with a 6th grade reading level. You have to have at least an 8th grade reading level. We have to provide law library for every inmate by a federal court order. Of course, that's on a 19th reading grade level, so we're providing law libraries for about 2% of our total inmate population who can read at that level. But they help all the others, and they've used it very effectively to sue us, I guess. Do we teach vocational training? Yeah, we sure do. Our education, we do a lot of GED training. My goal is hopefully that we could do that for most of the inmates, although you have to do it in a fairly short period of time. I want them to learn a trade, a skill while they're in. I want them to learn how to work. A lot of our inmates have never worked before they came. They possess no skills. 80 to 85% were substance abusers before they came in, and they'd like to be while they're in. That's a problem. Do we have substance abuse treatment programs? This year is the first year the legislature has appropriated money for substance abuse, although it's one of our largest problems inside the prison system and the largest threat to society outside of the prison system. Legislature appropriated $1 million for substance abuse treatment. We have been, since I've been commissioner, we've used the profits off of the collect telephones that we have in all our housing units. And we're devoting about $2 additional million to substance abuse treatment. And with that, there's one statistic, and let me tell you, research in correction is really poor because that has not been funded at all. But one statistic that we do have is that those who abuse both alcohol and drugs come back to us at a rate of 57%. Those who do not, or there is a treatment intervention, only come back at a rate of 18%. If that doesn't tell me something that I ought to be doing, then I'm blind. Our budget is $700 million a year for the Georgia Department of Correction. It shocks me, and growing. Our medical budget is right at $80 million. That is privatized. If we could just get a contract signed. But it is privatized. It's been bid. 3 times it's been bid. We will be privatizing other things in corrections. I hope this year, through the help of the legislature, I can privatize services to 35,000 misdemeanor probationers. We already have some private probation firms in the state after the passage of 1607, but I'd like to privatize the rest of it and let our probation staff concentrate on felons. That would reduce our caseloads to manageable sizes and at the same time provide adequate services for the misdemeanor probationers. There's some other efforts that have to be made before that's possible. There will be types of prisons that can be privatized. Not like Texas. We're not like Texas. The private industry lobbyists got in and their legislation of privatization of prisons is basically for minimum security short-term inmates. And that's what they have in abundance in Texas in those facilities. In Georgia, our minimum security inmates go to our 26 county institutions. Almost 4,000 of those inmates go to the county institutions. In July, we're paying those counties $12.50. We're now paying them $10 per head per day. No private industry can compete with that. I'm not telling you that the county runs it for $12.50, but that's what the state pays for the housing of state inmates in county institutions. But there are other inmates that would be very appropriate for privatization. Our population is getting much older. When I left, when I was under the control of Tom Perdue, our average age was 26. Now our average age is 31. And as we get more and more mandatory life sentences, we're going to be running geriatric homes. We already are. We have about close to 1,000 now who are in the geriatric category, many of them at Men's Correctional Institution in Milledgeville. We have quadriplegics, a lot of handicapped, and a lot of aged that I think can be better handled outside the prison system in a private type of operation. We do have funds for a new chronic care facility that's to be built in Bibb County, and I think that's a prime example of something we ought to be looking at for privatization totally. That is to handle AIDS, geriatrics, and by the way, AIDS, our rate coming in is about 3% of all our incoming population have AIDS. It's down a little bit since 4 years ago, but we're averaging about 43 deaths a year from AIDS. Our mental health problems I don't know if we're identifying them better or it's really growing. As we close down the mental hospitals, the population or the public does something with their deviants. Right now, what they're doing with their deviants, instead of putting them in the mental hospitals, we're putting them in our prisons and jails. And our population, especially mental health problems among our female inmates, are about 1/3. And so many of our female inmates have been sexually abused as children. A large percentage. We found this as we really delved into the sex scandal that happened before I was commissioner, and delved into what some of the causes were, and we were providing a lot more mental health programs for the women, both at Metro and Pulaski and Washington County. By the way, the women inmate growth rate, in the last 10 years, the males doubled and the females tripled in our prison population. I want to stop about now and answer questions, but I read in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago that at the current rate of growth, by the year 2058, 50% of the population will be locked up, and the other 50% of us will be outside looking in. That's pretty scary. Coupled with the story the next day that California, which I did the state plan when I was in private business for corrections in California, this year, corrections revenue, state revenue, was larger than the university system in California. I say that to tell you that the answers to crime is not in corrections. Never has been. All we can do is take those who are now 26, 27 years of failure time we get them. On an average, the nonviolent offenders we keep under 3 years, and we have 3 years to turn them around. The violent offenders, we have a little longer to turn them around, but we have a lot less to work with. One thing I'm real sure of, that a large percentage of our inmates now are not immoral, they're amoral. They're very sociopathic. A large percentage of our inmates were not raised, they just grew up. Nobody ever helped develop a conscience, or if you're Freudian, they don't have a superego. Many of our inmates would kill you without having the first twinge of conscience. And that's a difficult population to turn around, but that's our charge, to protect the public. I have to keep them in. I don't have any control over who comes in or who goes out, but I want to keep them in while they're here. And two, if I'm really going to protect the public, I got to pull out all the stops to turn their behavior around, whatever it takes, so I don't unleash them again to create additional victims. That's my job. I never get bored. I'm going to finish by telling you about last week, about the life of a commissioner. On Monday night, I was at Jackson, and the Supreme Court stayed an execution. I reset the date for Wednesday. Wednesday morning, I got up. My first meeting was the union, who was unhappy about some of the treatment they had received at Beaufort. My second meeting was with the Georgia Commission on Women, who Teresa Nelson of the ACLU had complained to them that the quality of the panties and bras were unacceptable at the women's prison, so we discussed that issue. At 1 o'clock, I was at Jackson to execute a prisoner. At 5 o'clock, I was in Reidsville talking with wardens. I never get bored. I like what I do because of the variety and the challenge. But I want to find some additional answers besides corrections to our crime problems.